Hey guys, welcome to my new video on the Big Three, and this episode is on Seneca. I am the disabled Stoic, and let's get right into the video. So, who was Seneca? He was born between 4 and 1 BC as Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Younger in Cordoba in Hispania. He was a Roman statesman, dramatist, Stoic philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero later on in his life. His father was Lucius Annaeus Seneca the Elder, a Roman knight and teacher in rhetoric. He grew up with severe asthma and struck by tuberculosis later in life. Little is known about Seneca's life before his exile in 41 AD. He died in 65 after being ordered to commit suicide by Emperor Nero. So, what he taught and how we know what he taught. Well, Seneca's surviving writings are so abundant, consisting of 12 essays on philosophy, 124 letters to his friend Lucilius Jr., 9 tragedies and 1 satire, but going into detail, every one of them would take ages, and I'm not going to go into detail on every one of them. Some of these are essays on the passions, and a passion is a negative emotion or a desire for an overindulgence of emotions such as pleasure. Some are consolations to people he was close with, giving them comfort and practical advice after a tragedy. The majority of his writings are the letters from a Stoic. He wrote to his close friend Lucilius Jr. on moral issues, but they take the form of open letters as well, at least most of them do. He taught us that virtue is the only true good. How no matter how long life is, it's about how you live it that matters. Seneca, the most interesting Stoic. This is what Ryan Holiday called Seneca in his article, Who is Seneca? Inside the mind of the world's most interesting Stoic. And for good reason. How can Seneca truly be a Stoic when he was filthy rich and was advised to Nero, one of the most terrible Roman emperors? As a Stoic, well, Stoics don't value material things such as money, and they wouldn't be an advice to a terrible Roman emperor if it didn't impact on other people. So why did Seneca do this? Well, he recognised that he was forced to walk a difficult path. Holiday goes on to write. So he was forced to be Seneca's advisor because the only alternative was death. Although, as we'll see later on in the videos, a video I'll make on Cato the Younger, death is sometimes the best option. Even Seneca knew that he was flawed. I am not a wise man, and I will never be. Seneca kept Stoicism in his heart, helping people to become better. Maybe Seneca believed that Nero could change. Maybe he saw a good man in his heart. He knew that if he wasn't Nero's advisor, someone worse would be, so he would rather be the man who took that job, that terrible job, rather than someone terrible be Nero's advisor, possibly making him a worse emperor than he already was. Seneca Nero, the wise advisor to a horrific emperor. He was from 54 to 62 AD, Seneca became Nero's advisor after being allowed to return from exile to do so. Seneca wrote the essay De Clementia on clemency or on mercy to Nero, explaining the need for clemency as a virtue in an emperor. Only the first book and the beginning of the second survive out of the original three of this essay. The essay dates to have been written after Nero turned 18, after the murder of Nero's rival Britannicus, who is thought to have been poisoned by Nero. But some scholars believe that the essay to Nero is a demand that Britannicus' murder would be the end of the bloodshed and not the continuation of it. Seneca writes about what makes a good emperor and how the only power was the one guided by universal reason, or as the Stoics call it, the logos, and how a good emperor always shows mercy. And he wrote, mercy is gentleness shown by a powerful man in fixing the punishment of weak one. Book 2, that's 3 not exclamation marks, section 3. Seneca also writes about the dangers of vengeance. Vengeance affects two purposes. It either affords compensation to the person to whom the wrong was done, or it ensures him against molestation for the future. A prince is too rich to need compensation, and his power is too evident for him to acquire to gain a reputation for power by causing anyone to suffer. Book 1, section 21. There are way more quotes, but obviously I won't go through everyone because we'll be here all day, and I don't have all day. This essay shows that Seneca did in fact try and guide Nero in the right direction. Exile, 8 years of peace. In 41 AD, then Emperor Claudius sentenced Seneca to exile after he was accused of having an affair with Julia Livilla, sister of former Emperor Caligula, which was a worse emperor than Nero. He'd spent those years at Corsica. His mother, Helvia, was obviously distraught, so Seneca wrote her a consolation, which was called On Consolation to Helvia. In the consolation, Seneca assures his mother that he is joyous and cheerful, and that the exile was just a change in place, where he has more time to work on himself and indulge in different activities without overindulging in pleasures. He used the time to be happy instead of moping around like most people nowadays would. The death of a rich man. In 65 AD, then Emperor Nero thought Seneca was involved in a plot to kill him, the Pisonian conspiracy. Nero then sentenced Seneca to commit suicide. But when Seneca heard of this news, I forgot to add this in, but when he received this news, he just carried on with his day. Didn't react badly to it, just carried on with his day, because he realised, as all Stoics do, that death is inevitable and it can come at any time. Seneca followed the tradition of cutting deep into his veins to bleed to death. His wife, Pompeia Paulina, tried to do the same, but Nero ordered her to be saved, probably to torment her throughout her surviving years of her husband's suicide. He was then carried into Bath and burnt, with no funeral rites performed as per his wishes, according to Publius Cornelius Tacitus, who was a Roman biographer or historian. He took his fate with pride, consoling those who were upset by it. He thought that having funeral rites was a waste of time, so by not having funeral rites he can have a more dignified death in the face of Nero. So, do we actually want to be like Seneca? Although similarly a hypocrite, being a hoarder of wealth whilst being a Stoic, we can't deny Seneca's influence, being the ancient Stoic with the most surviving writings to date. His consolations and essays and his letters all contain practical advice and wisdom. His response to his exile is one of grace and without anger. Be like Seneca, but also don't be an advisor to a horrific Roman emperor. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it. And stay tuned for my next video, the big three, which is on Epictetus. And of course, stay stoic.